History remembers battles in two ways: through victories and through humiliations. Victories are celebrated, written in glory, carved into memory. But humiliations cut deeper. And for Native America, history was full of both. Some moments shine as legendary victories, while others were humiliating defeats that changed everything. And today, we're counting down the 5 most humiliating defeats in Native American history. So let's get started. At number 5 comes the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814. The Creek Nation, one of the most powerful Native groups in the Southeast, had been split into two. On one side were the Red Sticks, traditionalists, who wanted to resist U.S. influence and hold on to their ancestral ways. And on the other were Creek factions, who sided with the United States. This division had already weakened them, and the Americans knew it. The Red Sticks fortified themselves at a bend in the Tallapoosa River in Alabama, building a barricade of logs to protect their village. They believed they were safe, protected by the river and by their defenses. But General Andrew Jackson brought with him not only overwhelming firepower, but also Creek and Cherokee allies who fought against the Red Sticks. With cannons pounding their defenses and allies crossing the river to attack from the rear, the Red Sticks were trapped. More than 800 Creek warriors were killed in a single day. Their defenses shattered, their families destroyed. The humiliation here was not just in defeat, it was in the betrayal. In the fact that Native fought against Native, manipulated into killing each other while Jackson claimed the land. The Red Sticks were left not only beaten but dishonored, their bloodline broken by their own brothers, their power destroyed in one of the bloodiest defeats in Native history. But humiliation did not end there. At number 4 comes the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, one of the darkest betrayals ever committed. The Cheyenne and Arapaho believed they were safe. They had been told by U.S. officials that if they camped near Fort Lyon and flew white flags of peace, they would be protected. They followed those orders. They set up camp along Sand Creek, filled not with warriors, but with families, women, and children. At dawn on November 29th, Colonel John Chivington led 675 soldiers against them. The warriors were away hunting, leaving the camp defenseless. What followed was not a battle. It was slaughter. Over 150 people were killed, and many of the dead were women and children. The humiliation was not only in the killing, but in what came after. Soldiers mutilated bodies, cutting off scalps, ears, and even genitals. They paraded these body parts in Denver saloons as trophies. For the Cheyenne and Arapaho, this was not simply defeat. This was betrayal under a flag of peace, the destruction of trust itself. They had surrendered, and instead of being treated as humans, they were dehumanized, mocked, and humiliated in death. Sand Creek became a symbol of the foulest kind of treachery, where honor was not only denied but spit upon. And still, the humiliations deepened. At number 3 is the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, when entire nations were forced to walk away from their homes. The Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole were known as the 5 civilized tribes because they had done what the United States asked of them. They built schools, farms, and towns. They adopted European-style government, writing systems, even clothing. The Cherokee created a constitution and published a newspaper in their own language. They believed that by showing they could live like the Americans, they would be allowed to keep their lands. They played by the rules. They trusted the system. But the system betrayed them. President Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, demanding that all these tribes move west. The Cherokee resisted, taking their case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they won. The court ruled they had the right to stay on their land, but Jackson ignored it, reportedly saying, "Let the court enforce it." Soldiers came anyway. Families were driven out at gunpoint. Thousands were forced to march westward in brutal conditions, with little food, no shoes, and no shelter from the cold. Along the way, disease and starvation killed thousands. The journey became known as the Trail of Tears. The humiliation here was in the betrayal of trust. These tribes had done everything the Americans demanded. They had proved themselves civilized. And still, they were treated as disposable, forced to abandon their homes and bury their children along the road. It was defeat wrapped in mockery, a message that no matter how much they adapted, they would never be accepted. And if the Trail of Tears showed humiliation through betrayal of law, then number 2 showed humiliation through massacre. In December 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, the Lakota Sioux were already broken. Their lands had been seized, the buffalo herds gone, and their people starving. They had surrendered to the U.S. Army and were in the process of handing over their weapons. It should have been peace. Instead, it became horror. A single shot rang out, no one knows from where, and the soldiers opened fire. With rifles and Hotchkiss cannons, they mowed down men, women, and children. Within minutes, 300 Lakota lay dead in the snow. The humiliation here was crushing. These were not warriors ready for battle. These were people who had surrendered, trusting that their captors would show mercy. Instead, they were massacred, and the insult that followed made it worse. The U.S. government awarded medals of honor to soldiers who participated, treating the massacre as a victory worth celebrating. For the Lakota, this was not only death, it was the final blow. A statement that their lives, their surrender, even their humanity meant nothing. Wounded Knee was not a battle. It was an execution, and the humiliation still echoes today. Finally, at number 1, the most humiliating defeat of all, the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521. The Aztecs were one of the greatest civilizations in the world. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was larger and more advanced than any city in Europe. They had floating gardens, aqueducts, vast marketplaces, and temples that towered over the landscape. They ruled an empire of millions, and their warriors were feared across the land. But when Hernán Cortés arrived with barely 500 soldiers, the empire began to unravel. Why? The answer lies in betrayal, disease, and humiliation. Cortés formed alliances with tribes who hated Aztec rule, convincing them to join him. These tribes became the bulk of his army, turning native against native. Then smallpox arrived, carried by the Europeans, and tore through the Aztec population. Leaders died, armies weakened, and the city's defenses collapsed. In 1521, after months of siege, Tenochtitlan fell. Emperor Cuauhtémoc, trying to flee by canoe, was captured, tortured for gold, and humiliated as his empire burned around him. The Spaniards leveled the city, tearing down temples and building Mexico City on its ruins. For the Aztecs, this was more than defeat. It was betrayal by their neighbors, devastation by a disease they could not understand, and humiliation at the hands of foreigners who mocked their gods and destroyed their way of life. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not only the most humiliating defeat in Native history, but one of the greatest humiliations in world history, an empire of millions brought down by a handful of invaders through trickery and cruelty. These 5 humiliating defeats, Horseshoe Bend, Sand Creek, the Trail of Tears, Wounded Knee, and the fall of the Aztecs reveal a tragic pattern. Native nations were not only defeated, they were betrayed when they trusted, divided against themselves, massacred when they surrendered, and mocked even in death. Humiliation was used as a weapon to break their spirit, to erase their honor. And yet, despite it all, Native peoples survived. They carried their languages, their traditions, and their resilience forward. The humiliations were meant to erase them, but they endured. The defeats belong to history. The survival belongs to the future.